Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining this preservation webinar. We're going to give everybody about another minute or two here, and then we'll get started. And I'm going to give you a little overview of the agenda in one moment. So just if you give us another minute here, we're just going to let a few more people in. All right, we're going to get going. So I want to welcome everyone who's here for this preservation webinar. This is something that the partnership tries to do annually with other allies who work a lot on housing preservation. And just for a moment, I want to reflect back on why we do this work. The California Housing Partnership was created more than 35 years ago by actually tenant attorneys who were pretty frustrated with the state of California at that time and the lack of attention to preserving affordable homes and the rapid conversion that was occurring by owners who were opting out of HUD programs after federal protections had ended. So I try to keep that history of ours in mind, that we come from a tenant perspective and tenant attorneys, even though our mission is to work with nonprofit and local government mission-driven affordable housing providers and financing folks. And today we try to do our best to serve folks across the state with a 45-person staff and a board that is still appointed by the governor and the legislature, even though we have no ongoing state funding and we otherwise operate as any private nonprofit has to. But today we're going to hear from a couple of folks in our research team who publish annually reports to try to make sure that all of us understand how much affordable housing we have in California, which is part of our original mandate from the legislature, what's being lost each year. And then by the end of this webinar, we're hoping to get you through to and what we're trying to do about it to stem those losses. And there'll be a policy discussion at the end. So the agenda will be presentations from the researchers about subsidized and unsubsidized housing at risk and being lost, followed by a panel discussion of subsidized housing preservation, then unsubsidized housing preservation, and then a policy panel that will pick up where do we go from here and how do we improve this situation. I'm going to ask everybody with questions to please put them in the Q&A, and we will make sure to get to your questions in advance. So to kick us off, I'm going to turn this over to Associate Research Director Danielle Mazzella, who's going to talk about our subsidized housing stock and what we have and what's being lost. Danielle.
Thanks, Matt. Good morning, everybody. Next slide, Sarah. So as Matt mentioned, part of our work at the partnership is we maintain a statewide database of subsidized multifamily rental homes. And given details on ownership and affordability, we are able to assess the likelihood of these developments converting to market rate. So here in the slide, you kind of see how risk is broken down along the 570,000 rental homes we have, and then concentrations by county in the map to the right. So more than 3/4 of the 570,000 affordable homes in the state are financed by the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program. Nearly half of these homes are in Southern California, which you can see here in the darker shades of purple, specifically Los Angeles, which has more than 140,000 affordable homes. You can also see concentrations in the Bay Area and in Sacramento, Fresno, and Kern counties. Next slide. Before we dive more into what's at risk, we think it's helpful to contextualize what's been lost. This chart shows the number of homes lost by each year by funding agency. And between 2000 and 2024, California lost more than 18,000 affordable homes due to expiring regulatory restrictions and owner decisions to opt out, sell, or allow their properties to convert to market rate. Between 2000 and 2009, more than a third of these lost homes were converted during this 10-year period, with a large number of them being subsidized by the Federal Housing and Urban Development HUD loans and project-based rental assistance contracts represented in the dark blue on the left side of the chart. During this period, we also start to see the loss of the first generation low-income housing tax credit developments represented in the orange as their 15-year affordability covenants expired. Moving to the right side of the chart, we see a large increase in the number of redevelopment funded and other locally restricted homes. Those in green lose affordability as well. Lastly, we see another wave of tax credit developments being lost as these only had 30 years of affordability instead of the typical 55-year regulatory agreements we see today. Next slide. Here we've broken down risk across the state and by funding program. What's at risk is anything we believe may convert to a market rate over the next 10 years. In the far left column of the table, you can see these broken out by program. So we have HUD, Housing and Urban Development, which is a federal program, the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program, LIHTC, and those also represented is those created through Section 514, 515, and Section 521 through the U.S. Department of Agriculture. These are primarily concentrated in rural areas and represent a somewhat significant part of what is at risk. We also have those developed through loans and grants from the California Housing Finance Agency, CalHFA, and the California Housing Community Development Department. Lastly, we have what is locally restricted, and this is anything created through Community Reinvestment Act dollars, through land use mechanisms like density, bonus, and inclusionary, as well as a number of other local programs. Our risk assessment relies primarily on the length of affordability and the ownership of the development. Those that are low risk means there are more than 10 years of affordability left on the development, or they are owned by a stable, mission-driven nonprofit organization. You can see concentrations are again in Southern California, the Bay Area, Sacramento, Fresno, and Kern counties, all in the darker orange, and represent more than 3/4 of all at-risk homes. Counties with the lowest concentration of affordable homes are in the Northern State and Sierra regions, shown in the lighter orange colors, but have some of the highest proportions of at-risk developments. In some of these counties, the loss of one or two developments would significantly impact the ability of lower income renters to find other affordable homes, as there may only have been 10 or so subsidized developments within the county to begin with. Last slide. Here we have broken down by the various risk levels. And so very high are developments that may convert to market rate within the year. The second column represents what's at high risk, which is anything that may convert within the next 1 to 5. And then moderate risk is anything in the next 5 to 10 years. Of the 48,000 at-risk affordable homes, 8 out of 10 are restricted and or assisted by HUD loans or project-based rental assistance contracts and low-income housing tax credits. Of most concern are project-based rental assistance contracts that are renewed for limited terms, either 1 or 5 year contracts, and finding strategies to preserve these long-term. At-risk developments with regulatory agreements through tax credits or local mechanisms are a growing portfolio of what is at risk, as many of these only had 30-year terms and are represented in the chart in the dark yellow sections. Here, what's at risk for USDA is represented to the gray. And then we also have what is funded through CalHFA and HCD in the yellow and light blue. For the state-funded programs, we have seen some successes like the Portfolio Restructuring Program, PRP, in preserving these developments, and hope to see more successes through new preservation funding and tax credits so these homes can remain affordable. And with that, I will pass it on to my colleague, Matt Alresnissen, to cover our unsubsidized work.
Thanks, Danielle. Like Danielle said, I'll be talking about our report on unsubsidized affordable housing. The primary difference between subsidized stock and the unsubsidized stock is that the unsubsidized stock doesn't receive direct subsidies from the government. Rather, these are units that are affordable to lower income households on the market. This is due to a number of factors, including the age of the building, typically older buildings, as well as the location of the property, in lower rent neighborhoods, for example. And next slide, please, here. And so we estimate in a report that there are about 902,000 existing affordable homes in California that are unsubsidized. In our report, we define these as properties where at least half of all units are affordable to households making 80% of the zip code's median income, with affordable being up to a household spending up to 30% of their income on rent. We've been collecting this data from CoStar since 2020 and collect it annually. You can see that compared to the subsidized stock, which Danielle just discussed, that the unsubsidized housing stock is significantly larger, the 902,000 versus about 570,000, neither of which quite meet the needs of the state's lower income renter households. There are a couple of important caveats I want to give to the data before we go deeper into it. First is that we don't actually know the makeup of the households that live in unsubsidized affordable units. It's entirely possible that although rents are affordable for lower income households, that the people actually living in these apartments make moderate or above moderate incomes. Also worth noting that the stock we're talking about here is only 5 or more units. We can't capture the 2 to 4 unit universe due to data limitations. But based on existing research, we know it's likely that significantly more affordable units exist within this range, the 2 to 4 unit range, especially in duplexes and triplexes. Next slide, please. And so because we're able to track properties at the property level over time since 2020, we estimate that about 189,000 homes lost affordability between mid-2020 to mid-2024. Unsubsidized affordable apartments have been mostly lost in the Bay Area and Southern California, as well as Fresno and Sacramento counties. You can see in Southern California, particularly in LA County and San Diego County. This is also a major fair housing issue, as about half of all lost properties are located in high or highest resource areas per the 2024 TCAC HCD opportunity maps. The continued erosion of this stock presents a serious challenge to affirmatively furthering fair housing, as lower income households are denied access to opportunity through the housing market. Next slide, please. And because we're able to track properties at the property level, and we understand where these properties have been lost over time, we have been able to develop a property-based risk model to understand where currently affordable properties are at imminent risk of losing affordability based on market conditions and property level characteristics, as well as projecting risk out at 5 years. We estimate that imminently there are about 40,000 affordable homes, unsubsidized affordable homes that are at very high risk of losing affordability of the about 902,000 total homes. We also estimate that in 5 years, there are about 268,000 to 333,000 affordable homes that are at high or moderate risk of losing affordability. Perhaps unsurprisingly, these homes are mostly concentrated in Southern California and the Bay Area. This is a slight difference from previous versions of this report. This is the first time we've been able to develop a property level risk assessment, and we're able to track risk at the individual property level instead of at the neighborhood level. And we will continue doing so going forward with this report. Next slide, please. And a little more geographic context for where at-risk homes are located. You see the map on the left shows the raw count of at-risk unsubsidized homes. This is both very high-risk homes that are immediate risk and homes that are at risk in 5 years, so the high and moderate risk as well. They're, again, generally concentrated in Southern California and the Bay Area, particularly in LA County. You can see it has the highest number of at-risk unsubsidized homes. However, when you consider the share of homes that are at risk compared to the total count of unsubsidized homes, the picture looks a little bit different. Central Valley counties like Fresno stick out, as well as other smaller and inland counties. Counties in the North State and in Sierras as well face disproportionately high levels of risk. This is in part due to the limited overall multifamily stock in many of these counties, but it is an important caveat to show that different market conditions impact different counties, different jurisdictions differently, which means that the solution to preserving affordability in these unsubsidized affordable homes might look different depending on various market contexts. Thank you. And with that, I will pass it back to Matt Schwartz.
Thanks, Matt. All right, this is a chance for you all to ask questions about the reports you've heard before we turn to. Actually, I apologize. Heather, you were correct to come on. We're going to hold the questions till after your panel. So please take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Matt. And thanks, Matt Alvarez-Neeson and Danielle for your top-notch research on this topic. So I'm Heather Bromfield. I'm the Associate Director of Preservation at Enterprise Community Partners in our Northern California office. We're really grateful that CHP has invited us to be part of the session. So our speaker, who I'm about to introduce, is going to be sharing about the strategy that entails purchasing relatively new buildings and placing long-term affordability restrictions on these properties. While it doesn't directly address the unsubsidized affordable housing stock that is at highest risk of becoming unaffordable right now, we can think of it as a long-term strategy to prevent some of what we're seeing right now, since eventually these newer properties would become more affordable and would be at risk of losing the affordability in the absence of restrictions. It also takes advantage of the fact that prices for buildings are deeply discounted relative to what they were prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, and it presents a short-term opportunity based on where we are in the market cycle. So with that intro, I'm going to introduce our speaker, who is Sean Clark from Bridge. Sean Clark joined Bridge as the Senior Vice President of Acquisitions and Development in March 2024. He's responsible for leading the strategic expansion of Bridge's real estate development and acquisitions pipeline throughout the West Coast. Before joining Bridge, Mr. Clark spent almost 20 years in leadership roles at Avalon Bay Communities, overseeing the company's national asset management platform, corporate design, and affordable housing functions. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to you, Sean.
Well, thank you, Heather. I really appreciate the time, and Matt, we're grateful for the time with CHP this morning and a chance to really highlight a bit of some of the work that Bridge has been doing. And a large part of our strategic focus over the last year is of course, to continue expanding the pipeline of impact that we have through creating affordable housing. We have a 3-year goal of driving at least an additional 5,000 units of affordable housing through the combination of acquisition and ground-up development. We can probably pop to the next slide here. And the specific project that we want to highlight is one that we purchased in late 2024. And as Heather said, this was a unique opportunity. It's a 94-unit property that's located in the heart of Berkeley, California, and it's one that was built originally by Avalon Bay, my former employer. Was built in 2014 and operated as a Class A market rate community. There were 15% of the units were inclusionary, so there were some affordability in place. But I think what's interesting about this one is it's part of a larger strategy, I think, to really create affordable housing. And I was really appreciative of the work that CHP overli that was provided earlier, just about the deep and profound needs around preservation. But here, I think what we've been able to do is to take what was otherwise a market rate community and put long-term affordability restrictions in place. And as you can see, that the goal here was to at least take 75% of the homes. And obviously, we're going to maintain the inclusionary units that were in place, but extend an additional amount of affordability to bring at least 75% of the community to 80% AMI and below. And I think what's important to highlight here, just in the context of some of what's already been mentioned, is that 35% of the in-place residents, which means that there was probably another 20% above the 15% residents that were already qualified for the inclusionary units. There was another 20% of those residents who were already rent burdened. What's interesting here is that the rent differential between what they were paying and versus what the 80% rent restrictions would provide on average, where it was about a 20% reduction in rent. So you can imagine, at least for those 20% of the units or residents that were already qualified at an 80% level, they were rent burdened already. And this is, it very much aligns with Bridge's mission around providing affordable housing. Bridges, did not acquire this property to be a short-term investment. It was intended to be a long-term preservation or creation of affordable housing. I should mention, that there isn't a lot of money available for this kind of acquisition. And if it was, I mean, I think that from a policy point of view, we would be aiming at driving even deeper affordability and more affordability. So if we could have taken it all the way to 100%, we would have done that. And if we could have provided more units that were deeply targeted, that's exactly what we would have done. So we're chipping away at it, and a lot of what we did here was really around that. We can probably go to the next slide, which I assume might be a sources and uses. Oh, this is just a location to give you an idea of where it is. And what we like about this asset too is just given where it's at in Berkeley, it would be a very difficult site not only to get a hold of, but to develop. The development costs, as Heather mentioned, we're sort of at this point in time where we're able to buy properties at a significant discount to what it would cost to build replacement or new units. And this provides a community that's really in the heart of Berkeley, adjacent to shopping, transportation, really everything that that makes for a great community. And to my mind, it's one of these. It's a place where we should be able to provide affordable housing, but urban infill sites like this are just very difficult to do and to get. But through acquisition, we were able to get this. We were able to get this property, as I said, at a significant discount to what it would cost to build. Let's go to the next one. Just a couple of slides of the asset or the community, and again, it's a combination of ones and twos, and fairly large and generously sized floor plans. Would be typically even a little larger than we might build in a tax credit setting. Let's go to the next one. Just a pretty good sense of what the community's interiors look like, or the apartment homes. Very nicely appointed, stone countertops, all that. So I think it just as an affordable housing resource, it's a unique opportunity. And one of the reasons that we like the newer vintage of this, it just minimizes the cost of ownership costs over time. Let's go to the next one. And this just gives you an idea of how we put the project together. We acquired it for $32 million. Financing and due diligence costs, and what's in there are all of our lender fees and acquisition fee that we apply to cover bridge costs, due diligence costs that range from everything from all the physical diligence and everything else, and legal and everything else that we have to do. Reserves are mostly just operating reserves. And again, just given the vintage of the community, we were able to underwrite relatively modest CapEx. On the sources side, we acquired this partnering with the National Equity Fund, which provided a roughly $23 million first mortgage, and then Bridge Housing Corporation balance sheet equity. And two strategies for this longer term. One is that, and this is probably a very important thing to highlight, the transition from a market rate to affordable property is something that we assume will happen over time. And most of the time we assume that that transition to hit the our affordability targets, in this case, we assume that that would take 3 or 4 years. And the reason being is that we don't force vacancy. And what we are doing is, as units turn over, we are bringing new income qualified residents into the property, into the community. And of course, we worked with those residents who are in place to income qualify them. And the reason I mention that is in part that we ultimately intend to recapitalize or refinance this community with a tax exempt bond. And the NEF loan gives us a great deal of flexibility to do that. Because typically a tax exempt bond is, as probably most know, you have to satisfy a 20 at 50 or 40 at 60 test within the first 12 months of issuance. NEF gives us a little more flexibility along that timeline to achieve it. And then using this or putting this on Bridge Housing's balance sheet, it just gives us a great deal of flexibility. And then eventually we'll be able to, or we hope to, recycle or replace our equity with external or externally raised capital. And most likely that would be private capital or private equity capital. And then I'd say one other last point is when as we think about these assets, we primarily underwrite them to be an affordable asset as we've sort of set out the business plan. So in this case, that's 75% of the units set aside with 80% AMI. And then at some point down the road, maybe at the time that we would refinance the initial mortgage, other things come into play as an option, maybe a resyndication or rehab tax credit program. At that point, the asset would be, or the community would be, 20 years old or 20, 25 years old, and it would probably be at a point in its life cycle where it will need more investment. Anyway, so with that, Heather, I can stop. And if there's anything you want me to drill down on before we jump in, I can.
Thank you so much, Sean. We're really grateful for hearing about this work. My first question, I think, is similar to what one of the folks in one of the participants has shared as a question. My question was going to be, what were the biggest challenges to making an acquisition like this happen? And the question in the chat was, specifically about finding a lender. So was that a big challenge for this, or was it something else?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of challenges. The most being, and in this case, we were able to do this transaction off market, but I think generally speaking, the challenge is that you're having to meet market expectations. And so what I mean by that is it's not just pricing, but it's the ability to work through the sale process that doesn't put a great deal of burden or uncertainty on the seller. And so the things that the sellers don't want to be dependent on are things like tax exempt financing and the process or the time that oftentimes that takes. And just as an example, the difference between the way that we closed on this deal with NEF versus how we might do it if it was a bond issue, we would need 30, 45 days to do the physical diligence. And then for this deal, we closed within 30 days following the completion of diligence. So a 60-day timeline is essentially market. It's how you would have to conduct the process if you were chasing anything in the marketplace that was widely or broadly marketed. In this case, the seller also didn't necessarily want to be burdened with, or they don't really even understand the process of issuing tax exempt bonds, and that would add another 60 to 90 days on top of that timeline. And so I think just in terms of being able to acquire assets like this, you have to be able to do it in a way that you can be market timing responsive and you can match market timing. and other things like including financing contingencies or contingencies for regulatory agreements or regulatory approvals. Like in this case, we had to get the city of Berkeley to consent to the transfer, and we had to get them to assign the in-place regulatory agreement to Bridge. I guarantee it is 100 times easier for Bridge to approach the city of Berkeley with a strategy to not only preserve the asset, but also to create more affordability than it might be for somebody else. So I think that's an advantage for us, but nonetheless, I think that the sellers just don't want to be burdened with the contingencies that they don't understand, or that they think create risk or drags on the timeline.
Absolutely. Okay, we have time for a quick clarification question before I pass it back to Matt Schwartz. You mentioned a couple of numbers. You said like a 2040 strategy or I think you said 40/60. Can you clarify just for a non-finance audience what that means?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, there's one of two strategies from a tax exempt bond point of view. It's either we would do private activity bonds as a recycle bond, or we would pursue a 501c3 bond. A 501c3 bond is somewhat limiting because if we do financing with a 501c3 bond, any external equity that's involved that's paired with that 501c3 bond has to be matched in terms of public purpose and nonprofit status. And so we probably would have pursued a private activity bond in this case that would have given us more flexibility around raising external equity to replace our own. But the test that you're speaking of specifically is there's really a couple of different tests. For a private activity bond, within the first 12 months, you either have to satisfy 20% of the units at 50% AMI test or 40% of the units at 60% AMI. There's an added test for a 501c3 bond, which is a 75% and 80% AMI test within 3 years. The other big requirement, of course, is that there's a rehab requirement that requires that 15% of the acquisition basis or total cost be reinvested in a property. So that's also something you just have to sort out and manage. And in this case, I think that when we get around to doing the bond issue, which probably would be in the next few years, there will be places and ways that we could invest that capital in the asset to ensure that we minimize issues that will come up as a preservation asset down the road.
Got it. Thank you so much for all that explanation. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Matt Schwartz for our next segment.
Thank you, Heather.
Great. Thanks, Sean and Heather. Sean, just want to shout out for Bridge being able to pull off this acquisition and gradual transformation of a market building into an affordable building. It's all too rare right now without state resources to assist. So it's great. So we're now going to turn and just want to acknowledge, I see a couple of questions. Jeff Levin, see your question, and we will circle back to questions. But first, I want to invite our board vice chair and also the chief operating officer of Community Housing Works, Sociata Vuti. Welcome, Sociata. And her colleague, Kevin Leichner, senior vice president for housing at Community Housing Works, to talk about one of those older HUD-assisted properties that needed preservation, not once, but it turns out twice, and the story of how you all did that and why you did it. So over to you.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate that. And thank you to California Housing Partnership for hosting this really important discussion on preservation. Good morning, everyone. Again, I'm Sociata Vuti, the Chief Operating Officer for Community Housing Works. We'll be co-presenting today about one of our communities, stabilized communities, Bandar Serlam. And before I go into that, just a little information about Community Housing Works. We are a nonprofit developer and owner of affordable housing. We also provide services to residents, and our mission really is to create opportunities for families, households, and individuals. We have been around for about 37 years, and we are based in San Diego, but we have communities and serve communities throughout California and Texas as well. Currently, we are at over 5,000. We oversee over 5,000 permanent affordable communities that's in our stabilized portfolio, and more than half of our communities came through acquisitions. And of that, we have a total of 53 communities again through across California as well as Texas metros. And we currently have 2,000 unit pipeline as well. Next. So today we are going to focus on one of our communities, or one of our preservation communities, Bandar Salam. Bandar is located in San Diego in the neighborhood of City Heights, which is about, less than 10 miles away from downtown San Diego, really central. The demographics there really consist of immigrants, low-income families, a lot of different investment and reinvestment in that neighborhood, and community housing works, as Matt said, that Bandar Salam, we invested in this community back in the late 1990s. It really has two chapters to it, and I'm here to tell the first chapter. And just a quick kind of overview of Bandar. It is 68 apartment units consisting of 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 bedroom units. And I'll talk a little bit more about how that came to be as well. The families that we serve there are families that have income limits of 45 to 50% of the area median income. So just to kind of give an idea of that, in San Diego County right now, a family of 4, that would equate to about $82,700. So that's just kind of the family dynamics that we're serving there at Bandar. And if we move to the next slide. So we started our story with Bandar back in 1999 when we acquired the community and rehabbed the community. And how it all began was that Community Housing Works was doing a lot more work in that area, in that particular neighborhood, and heard about a really challenging community where residents were really unhappy with their current landlord, with their current living situation, and was asking for help. They were going and attending community meetings where there were city officials, neighborhood representatives, and it got lifted to Community Housing Works, where we said, okay, this is something that we want to learn more about and see how we could potentially help support what the residents and what the community is looking for. And so CHW had a listening session with the residents, where the residents talked about their living conditions, talked about the needs and how the community is not meeting its needs. And just from those conversations, we were able to come back internally and discuss how we could potentially be a part of helping to provide a solution for the community, the neighborhood, and the situation at hand. And so that is kind of one of the ways that we were able to really work and really engage with the community and be able to acquire and make this rehab happen, was the residents, working with the residents, working with the community members to really see how we could make an impact on the community. Next. So similar to the other affordable communities that we had to put together the financing together, it's one approach or one step is to making sure that we're meeting the needs of the community. And the other part of that is how can we get some financing together in order to actually address and implement and execute on the work that we want to have happen, the impact that we want to create in the community. And so this gives you a little bit of a snapshot of what was the investment like back in 1999, where our total cost here was slightly under $7 million, and that includes low-income housing tax credits. It includes investment from the local housing agency through the San Diego Housing Commission, and the program through the Federal Home Loan Bank, which is the affordable housing program as well. Next. The next couple of slides, just wanted to share some before and after photos. Just as I had mentioned, this particular community, formerly known as Winona Gardens, was really mostly occupied by Somali refugees. And they had been, the former landlord or the former owner really had this community in a dilapidated state, did not have any areas, common space areas for families with children to convene, any space for community members to convene. And those were some of the asks during the rehab, is that one, that we provide playgrounds for different for different age groups, that we provide community space for members to meet, and to have resources that community housing works typically provide, like after-school programs and adult education. And so we take all of those into consideration, including making some reconfigurations of the units so that we would accommodate the families and family sizes that we would typically see from the population that was occupying the community. This is just one example of before and after. The next photo, or the next slide, is also, again, the before, dilapidated, and then the after. What you see here is the leasing office. You can see parts of the playground here as well. Really taking into, again, having the community engaged in the process and the design and the rehab really made a huge difference. Next. So that was the beginning. That was the beginning. Our initial kind of syndication process, rehab process, working with the community, setting up the community in terms of, okay, now that we have acquired this community, now that we've made these changes, we're also going to make sure that we're going to establish channels of communications with the residents. At the time, the community had what they called the elders, which were leaders of the communities, where they played the liaison between the owner, CHW, and the residents. And so we kept that communication, lines of communication open during the 15 years that we during the low-income housing tax credit kind of regulatory requirement. And so I wanted to highlight, during this particular time period in 2013, 2015, there was a reinvestment that CHW made to the community, with their engagement as well. So I think we can move on to the next slide just to kind of demonstrate some of the things that we did. Bandar Salam also sits kind of on the bottom of canyons. And so there's lots of things that kind of go, there's lots of brush, number one. And then there's also lots of activities that happen out down in that area that really sometimes go unseen, or people don't pay attention to it. And so we found it really valuable, again, to continue to build relationships with community members, community organizations, police departments, and other public agencies, in order to kind of keep eyes and ears in the community, because it's it's kind of hidden and tucked away. And so this particular project, we had partnered up with Urban Lift in the City Heights area, also with the local organization called San Diego Canyonlands, where we received funding through Wells Fargo and Urban Lift, about $170,000 of grant funds to help clean up the area right outside of Bandar Salam, as well as doing some facelift within the community as well. We redid the parking lot, replaced fences, and we also did put a new monument up, just a lot of activities. And the next photo or the next slide is also another example of kind of the before and after of the canyon area, just right outside of the Bandar Salam community. Can I see the next one as well? Just some more photos of community organizations. We had high school volunteers, university volunteers, residents volunteer in helping with the cleanup and maintaining the area just right outside of Bandar. Next. Some more photos here. One of the things that we did as a part of the community engagement was getting the police department involved, having them walk the site with Bandar residents and community residents within the neighborhood. And we, walked around a few blocks and just pointing out lighting. The simple things, but those types of things really helped and really helped create the safety and making the residents feel safe for their families as well. And that is, what we continue to do there with the community at Bandar. We have, and that, kind of takes us to where we're at right now. Before I hand it off to Kevin, maybe just to share a couple other kind of success that came out of Bandar outside of just the physical asset and doing the facelift and making sure that we're creating a healthy and safety community for our residents. But with the investment, with the preservation of this community, we have really been able to not only provide the affordable housing for the families who reside there, but also provide resources in such a way that we have had the community there and residents that have lived at Bandar have, we've had residents who have run for city council seats. We have had PhD doctorates that have come back to Community Housing Works, make presentation, be keynote speakers at our events to encourage and really inspire the future of not just the Bandar residents, but also the rest of our the rest of the families that we serve in our communities. So with that success, I want to hand it off to Kevin Leichner, who will talk about the second chapter of our preservation story.
Hey, thank you, Sociata. It's great to be here with everyone today. Sociata has actually been with Community Housing Works for the entire Bandar Salam story from the beginning to now. So it's really amazing to have such a great resource on our team who has been with the property through every twist and turn. I would be remiss in not sharing that the meaning of Bandar Salam is peace be with you. And this community is home to primarily refugees from Horn of Africa countries, including Somalia, Eritrea, Djibouti, and Ethiopia. So this is really a very tight-knit community that's been able to maintain its cultural and religious practices due to the preservation of this housing. So it's a beautiful preservation story. It kept this community intact from the beginning when Community Housing Works acquired the property. And this is also a kind of housing that isn't being built anymore. These are large family apartments in a garden-style complex in the middle of urban San Diego. There are 4 and 5 bedroom apartments, as Sociata mentioned, which the market just is not providing, and even tax credit finance developments are building at this point. So as you can imagine, there's high demand for this housing. The property manager receives calls every day from members of the community who want to live at Bandar. And so it was wonderful to be able to continue the story of Bandar 25 years after the original preservation efforts. The need to reinvest in Bandar had grown over the intervening years, and community housing works began to apply for bonds and tax credits for Bandar several years ago. And if we could go to the next slide, please. Because there are little to no state resources to assist with preservation, bonds and tax credits were the only avenue available to reinvest in this community. To obtain a meaningful amount of tax credits, we had to leverage the value of the property. Fortunately, the value had risen consistently over the past 25 years, as had values overall in that part of San Diego. Due to the scarcity of tax-exempt bonds and tax credits for preservation, it took 4 applications over multiple years to the California Bond and Tax Credit Committee to obtain the necessary bonds and tax credits. And so with this chart of sources for Bandar, you can see that the primary sources were a new permanent mortgage supported by rents at the community. What we refer to as a seller carryback loan. So that was that part of the value of the property that had grown over time that we put back into the property as both the seller and the buyer. And then we also had to have what they call a sponsor 50% test loan. That's pretty esoteric. It is for the purpose of meeting some of the requirements of those tax-exempt bonds. And then the San Diego Housing Commission loan, if you recall, the original sources and uses was originally significantly smaller. This did not actually represent new money, but we recast and reassigned the original loan principal plus all of the accrued interest over the past 25 years into a new loan to the property. We transferred over the available owner reserves, and this was a very tight financing situation. So we also counted all of the income that was going to come in from operations during the construction loan as a source to be able to leverage more tax credits. We deferred some developer fee, and then that tax credit equity that came in was really crucial to preserving and rehabilitating Bandar Salam. So total about $30.3 million in total development costs. And if we could go to the next slide. The uses of the financing went to acquiring the buildings and the land, to hard costs, to architecture and engineering, construction loan interest, transaction costs, new capitalized reserves, cost of issuance, and then developer costs. So again, if you remember that original $6 or $7 million budget, 25 years later, 30.3 million. So it also shows kind of the change in value over time. And then in the top margin there, you can see some of the completed work at Bandar, including brand new gut rehabbed kitchens and bathrooms, brand new exterior work. And I think, you know, the Bandar story is a wonderful one in that we were able to preserve this community. I think it does point to some policy needs at the state level. We really do need some kind of recurring renewable state source that would provide gap financing for preservation. The California Department of Housing and Community Development does have a reinvestment program when money is available, but it really only targets communities that are already within their portfolio. If something similar to that program could be expanded to cover all preservation throughout the state, that would make a huge difference for communities like this one. And then, of course, Congress did just expand access to tax-exempt bonds and the 4% tax credits, which are used more frequently for acquisition and rehabilitation like this. But we have yet to see if that additional bond cap and those additional tax credits will flow down to more rehabs, or will just continue to address the great need for new construction in the state of California. So again, really points to the need for some kind of state level resource that can be applied to preserving and rehabilitating existing communities.
Kevin, thank you for that segue. I'm going to ask you to address a couple of the questions that relate to the financing. And the first one from Veronica Garcia is about the acquisition sources at the full rehab, and I'm not quite sure if your chart that's visible right now already answers that, or if you see another answer to that question.
The sources were on the previous slide. We could go to those.
Well, I guess the question is, how long did it take after acquisition to close permanent sources for the full rehab?
I see. Okay. The original preservation effort was in 1999. The resyndication was in 2024. Once we had obtained the bonds and tax credits, we had 6 months to close financing, and then we began the rehabilitation right away.
Great, thanks. And another financing related question from Hillary Carter is when you use tax credits to resyndicate, does the affordability restriction restart? And if so, for what period of time?
Yes, it does. And in fact, in California, if you resyndicate, you will frequently have the original regulatory agreement, which could be from 30 to 55 years, still in place. And then you do add on a new regulatory agreement for a new 55-year period of affordability. And all of the rents have to stay at least at the affordability levels that they were at before, or they have to be deepened to deeper targeting.
Thanks. And the last Banda Salam question, Societe, this one might be for you from Nadar Ho, which is, can you explain how the relocation of the 68 households worked and whether they were able to come back afterwards?
Yes, great question. And the response is for both phases of preservation, and that is that we did temporary relocation while we rehabbed. We call it the occupied rehab process. And so as we rehabbed the units, we temporarily relocated families, and once it was completed, we brought families back in. So that is our typical approach to occupied rehabs. And yes, everyone who chose to come back came back.
Great, thank you. Now I'm going to turn back to Sean because there are a couple of questions here. Sean, the first one from Jeff Levin, which you can probably see, but just wanting to inquire more about the debt service that you have to pay on the financing and the equity, and how much those cost and how you're paying for those.
Well, I guess there's two parts of that. Part A is the cost of the NEF capital, which does tend to be a little bit more expensive than even conventional financing. We've negotiated a rate with NEF that provides us, I think the going in rate here was around 6%, which at the time was based on a spread, which was 230 basis points over the 5-year SOFR. And so that index, sort of moves around. It's just
I'm sorry, SOFR is an acronym we should spell out for folks.
Oh gosh, I think I've forgotten exactly what SOFR stands for, so maybe somebody can Google it real quick.
Okay, basically it's an index, international index.
It's like yeah, exactly. The 10-year index is what, oftentimes a lot of agency financing is based on. But it's the index of choice for NEF. And so that's the base cost there. But the important part for the NEF financing, which is really key to the strategy, is that there's no prepayment and we can repay that loan anytime over the first 5 years. It's a 5-year term and then we can repay it. So the idea obviously is that we were trying to reposition the community with increased affordability, and that gave us the flexibility to do it. So that's the cost of that. And then the loan fees on top of that, I could give you the specifics of it if you need me to, but I'd probably have to do a little bit of digging to give it to you. And feel free to follow up with me if you want that detail. But the other side of this, the cost of capital on our balance sheet, a lot of the money that Bridge has to fund these types of acquisitions came from a general obligation bond that we did in 2020. And so that has an underlying cost to it. Generally speaking, we try to target at least a 6% yield on the investment that we make, because that covers our cost of capital. And it also ensures that if we have to replace it with external equity, that we can attract new money if we need to. But again, I think this would be the kind of thing that if there was publicly available dollars that could reduce the burden the bridge would have to shoulder or carry the cost, we would do a couple of things. We'd be able to put more affordability in place, and we'd be able to reduce the burden on our balance sheet, which would give us more capacity, to do more of this. I'm not sure if this question was asked, but some of the affordability, that we're driving is something that we're trying to drive for the long term. Not only is there, the Berkeley regulatory agreement, we've got other regulatory mechanisms. We have covenants to NEF, and then we have our own, sort of, commitment to ensure that things align with our, with our purpose as a housing nonprofit to drive affordability. And for us, we're generally targeting a minimum of 75% affordability to ensure that, we are really fully aligned with what we're about, which is creating affordable housing.
That's great, really helpful. And I think you've just now answered Veronica's second question. And maybe I'll paraphrase, which is, yeah, did you need subsidy to make this happen? What I've heard you say is you did without subsidy, but if you'd had a source of state subsidy available, that it would have enabled you to commit to more and deeper affordability much earlier in the project. Is that
Yeah,
about right?
that's exactly right. So, we do what we could, leveraging or using the Board of Equalization's benefits through the welfare tax exemption. And there's a limit to that in terms of how much rent reduction you can drive through property tax savings. In this case, I think it's meaningful in that we're able to drive some significant reductions and reduce rent burden. I think this really opens up this asset to be a much more affordable, housing resource for people who work in Berkeley, for people who work in the Bay Area. As we all know, affordable housing in the Bay Area comes at such a significant premium. And I just think from a housing equity point of view, being able to provide a housing option like this that was built as a Class A community in an area where the schools are solid, the shopping opportunities, it's off the charts, highest resource area in terms of the kinds of things that are available to residents of this community. And the ability to access it is through acquisition, at least right now, it's pretty amazing.
That's great. Thank you. So we're running a little bit behind. I see there are a couple more questions about the Bandar, one from Brandon. So, Sean, I'm going to ask you if you could respond in typing to Brandon's question. It doesn't have to be long.
Sure.
And then Sociata and Kevin, if you could divide up the other two questions from Star Johnson and Michael Adams, because I want to turn this over. Thanks again, Sean, to my very esteemed colleague, Shioni Munoz-Fliegel, who is the Executive Director of Housing California, with whom we work very closely on almost everything we do. And Shioni, thank you for being here to moderate this policy panel.
Thank you, Matt. And thank you for everyone joining today. We're super happy to be having this conversation with all of you. Preservation is such an important part of the work that we're doing to provide affordable housing here in California. We're going to transition now away from the case studies where we got to go deep and see how people are putting our work into action. And we're going to kind of take it up and talk about policy and what, in particular, what the state is doing, where we're seeing progress, where we have some places we're getting stuck a little, but where we're trying to actually change policies in ways that actually facilitates more of the work that we just learned about in the case studies. So we have a great group of presenters. Today, I'm going to let everyone kind of introduce themselves as we jump in because we're running a little bit behind. But I want to kick us off by asking, I'm going to start with Andrew at CHP, but asking Andrew to introduce himself and share a little bit about what he's learning around where we're actually seeing progress in the policy world on preservation here in California. Andrew, would you
Hi,
introduce
yeah,
yourself?
yeah, thank you, Shiani. Hi, everyone. I'm Andrew Dawson. I'm with the California Housing Partnership. I'm a policy advocacy manager with the partnership here. working on state policy, both legislative and regulatory work here. One thing that did pass last year and got signed by the governor was Assembly Bill 2926. That was really exciting. It was one of the bills that the partnership helped lead along with Layla here, which you'll meet in just a minute, um, where we actually updated the preservation notice law. So preservation notice law is a law about subsidized affordable housing and requiring certain notices as the deed restriction expires. What we ended up doing with Assembly Bill 2926, AB 2926, was updated so that if there was a bona fide offer to purchase from a preservation buyer, so a person or organization who will keep the affordability long term, that the owner will have to either continue the affordability or sell it to that buyer. That's really exciting because that guarantees that at-risk properties will maintain affordability as long as there's a bona fide offer to purchase. The Department of Housing and Community Development, HCD, is implementing that right now or figuring out how to implement that. And I think Layla has more updates there. But we also have two bills this year on annual progress reports reporting that our colleague Amiel can talk about as well.
Thanks, Andrew. Amiel, can we go to you next? Why don't you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about those progress report bills?
Yeah, thanks, Shioni, and hi, everyone. Amiel Atanasio. I'm a program manager with the state and local policy team here with Enterprise, working a lot on regional and state advocacy, especially around preservation. So as Andrew and Shioni kind of previewed, there are some really exciting preservation-related bills happening right now, especially around the annual progress reports. These are reports that jurisdictions across California are required to submit every year to show their progress towards their state mandated housing goals, otherwise known as the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, or RHNA. So the first bill that's going through its way in the legislature is AB 670 by Assemblymember Quirk Silva. That is a bill that is being sponsored by us over at Enterprise alongside the Public Interest Law Project, the Association of Bay Area Governments, and the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. So what that bill would do is it would allow jurisdictions to report any preserved unsubsidized affordable housing as part of their annual progress report. Essentially, that would give them some credit towards their state mandated housing goals, otherwise known as RHNA, which is really exciting. And it also includes some provisions around demolition reporting requirements just to ensure cities are following through with their commitments through the Housing Accountability Act, which is really important as well from a tenant protection standpoint. And the other bill is AB 726. This one being co-sponsored by our friends here at California Housing Partnership alongside CHC, the California Housing Consortium, and that would allow jurisdictions to report preserved and substantially rehabilitated subsidized affordable housing towards their annual progress report, at least for properties that are over 15 years old. So some of the kind of thinking behind these two bills is that giving jurisdictions credit for some of these preservation activities hopefully could incentivize local public investment into these types of activities, especially given the state funding environment we're in at the moment. It's not a secret. I'm sure folks here in the webinar know the deficit years we've experienced. So hoping that by some of these regulatory changes, there could be some local incentives for investment.
Thank you. Now we're going to turn to Layla. Layla, if you can introduce yourself. I know you, Andrew, mentioned you've been working with the partnership on Assembly Bill 2926 and have really been playing a leadership role in interfacing with HCD as they think about implementation. Can you share a little bit about that work and where you're seeing progress?
Of course, thank you. My name is Leila Giti Satani. I'm a staff attorney with the National Housing Law Project, and NHLP is a legal advocacy center centered around advancing housing justice for poor people and communities, and that includes preserving and expanding the nation's supply of safe and affordable homes. We're also a support center for California legal service organizations. And so we were able to co-sponsor along with CHP and CRLA, the AB 2926, as Andrew mentioned. And so NHLP is really excited about AB 2926 and the possibility of saving at-risk affordable housing. When we talk about affordable housing, right, the loss of affordability can be devastating to those families that live in those units, and can lead to displacement, and it's really a loss for the community as well. And currently, given the lack of affordable housing, saving the affordable housing that we currently have is really critical to protecting families and low-income communities. And so HCD, the Department of Community and Housing Development, Community Development is the entity responsible for enforcement of our California Preservation Notice Law, as Andrew mentioned, and they have really been laying the foundation for preservation efforts. So if you go on HCD's website, you can see that they have a guide to affordable housing preservation laws, and they are currently updating that to include the AB 2926 updates. Also, under the Preservation Notice Law, owners of affordable housing are supposed to do an annual certification of their compliance with Preservation Notice Law. And so more information on that as well on HCD's website, and to actually go and do the certification needed. Also, HCD is working on a process to do proactive outreach to owners that are 3 years out from expiration, because under the Preservation Notice Law, in addition to what Andrew was talking about with the notice of opportunity to submit an offer to purchase, there is a 3-year notice prior to expiration, a 12-month notice, and a 6-month notice. And so HCD is working on doing more proactive outreach ahead of that, of those obligations. And so that process, they are still refining it, but it's going to be a great system to do more monitoring of properties and be able to help owners understand their obligations under the Preservation Notice Law. And I think, we're at a great table here where so many organizations are working on preservation or interested. And I think one great effort that we can all make is kind of spreading the word about the Preservation Notice Law. It really is a great tool that we have here in California. And so making sure that tenants know about this great law, that owners know, local governments know as well. So I think the more people know about this great protection that we have, and can really go a long way in ensuring preservation, and that we're really utilizing the laws that we have to their extent.
Thank you. Is there anything else you'd like to share with this group around how they can be involved in the Preservation Compact work and some of the things you've been talking about?
Yeah, so along with CHP, NHLP has been working together to kind of jumpstart a preservation compact in California. And so that compact is meant to serve as a statewide table for various stakeholders to develop and execute strategies that drive real preservation solutions for tenants and communities. And the ultimate goal is reducing the loss of at-risk subsidized housing to zero. And so in our work, we see that one big issue is there really is a lack of coordination amongst organizations and stakeholders, and a lack of proactive work to do preservation. And so by bringing together stakeholders together in this way, we're hoping that that compact encourages collaboration by creating a space for coordination, big picture thinking, and sharing of resources. And there are models from other parts of the country, and one really successful one comes from Chicago. There is a Cook County Preservation Compact that has been doing great work in Chicago. And so we're currently meeting with a small group of organizations, and they range from legal services, tenant organizers, and organizations advising developers. So together, we're trying to develop a framework for a compact, and to prioritize goals and strategies for that compact as well. And so We're looking at barriers and opportunities for system-wide improvements, including regulations, legislation, financing, education, and outreach efforts. And so we're still in the planning phases, but the intention is to open up the compact to more organizations early next year to kind of begin that important work. So I'm going to share my email in the chat for folks to reach out if you're interested in joining the compact or just for more information.
Thank you. You all have touched on some really important pieces of the work that we need to be pushing to preserve our affordable housing supply. One of the things Housing California has partnered with the California Housing Partnership on over the last several years is producing Roadmap Home 2030, a long-term plan to address California's affordable housing and homelessness crisis. We, over the last year, have been working to update that and have engaged our partners, including many of you, from across California to better understand what kinds of policies the state of California needs to be pursuing to meet all kind of 4 of our Ps around preservation, protection, production, and really preventing homelessness. And there are 4 things that really popped out through that process, some of which we've talked about today. The notion that we need to be funding the acquisition and rehabilitation of naturally occurring affordable housing, as well as our subsidized housing, that we need to be expanding the portfolio reinvestment program, that we actually need a funding mechanism to provide emergency operating support to state-assisted affordable housing that's at risk of foreclosure, and that we need to be pursuing policies that help tenants and nonprofit developers and other community interests purchase housing through TOPA, tenant opportunity purchase, or community opportunity purchase policies. So all 4 of those have come up in the roadmap. The other thing that comes up in the roadmap, of course, and probably is the biggest unifying theme, is that we need money for all of this work. To that end, Housing California is working with many of you, our partners at the California Housing Consortium, our partners in the legislature, to put a bond on the ballot in 2026. And 2 of those ideas are actually already included in the bond proposals that are being considered by the legislature, including the Community Anti-Displacement and Preservation Program, which I'm going to ask Amiel to talk about, and the Portfolio Reinvestment Program, which I'm going to ask Andrew to talk about, because the bond really is presenting us with an opportunity to secure funding not only for building new homes, but for preserving the ones we have. So Andrew, why don't I pass it over to you?
Yeah, definitely. So the bond, as Shoni was saying, is a $10 billion bond for affordable housing and infrastructure. We haven't figured out exactly what that split is going to be among different programs, but one of the programs that is going to be funded, hopefully, is a portfolio reinvestment program that the Department of Housing and Community Development puts out or helps administer. This is a program to really preserve existing HCD-funded housing projects. So this would be by extending or restructuring affordability agreements, providing capital for improvements, things like that, for existing affordable housing that HCD already funds. There's some mechanisms to the program that can be improved, of course, but it is a really important program to fund preservation for existing buildings right now. And then I could pass it over to Amiel to talk about the other one, which would be the CAP program.
Great, thanks, Andrew. And yeah, the CAP or the Community Anti-Displacement Preservation Program is included in both versions of the state housing bond bills, which is really exciting to see. In the original ledge language, it currently has $500 million allocated towards that program. But as Andrew mentioned, some of that split will likely be determined as the bond conversations go along. But the program will provide funding for the acquisition and rehabilitation of unsubsidized affordable housing, which is really exciting to see a program at the state level to even fund that. And also even the inclusion of both CAP and PRP in the state housing bond, I think just is a really nice indication that preservation is getting more recognition at the Capitol as a core component of our affordable housing strategy. So the CAP program would provide those loans for that type of acquisition that could help developers and community organizations purchase some of those properties, similar to what Sean presented, and even improve the dynamics of some of those acquisitions. As Sean mentioned earlier, if there was available public funding, they could have gone for 100% of deed restriction for all those units, or even deeper affordability. So just goes to show some of the potential impacts of this program and funding.
Thank you both. We're going to open it up to audience questions now. If you have a question, please drop it in the chat. And Matt, maybe you can help me because I'm splitting screens here, make sure that we're capturing things. Sorry, put it in the Q&A, not in the chat.
Gotcha. Thanks. Chioni, I just want to acknowledge there's lingering question. I think it's for Sean. If you're still able to respond to that, you can do that in just the typing, because I want to reserve this time for policy questions. So please, folks, join us in asking our panel here for any policy questions you have or thoughts you have about how we can improve the state's preservation of affordable homes. Okay, yes, you're right. The question is for Kevin. Thank you, Heather. All right, folks, I'll give you another minute or two to come up with your questions for Chioni and Andrew, Layla, and Amiel. It's your chance if you have brilliant ideas about how we can stop the loss of affordable homes.
And I might just make a pitch. I know I put the link in the chat. We are definitely in an all hands on deck moment with the bond. The assembly bond has moved through the legislature on the assembly side and is now sitting on the Senate. The Senate bond has not moved. They can both still move because of the way the legislative rules work. But we'll have a very short window when legislative members return to Sacramento on the 18th. As you all know, our political environment is very chaotic, with many things pulling on our members' attention, from redistricting to immigrant rights to cuts to Medicaid, you name it. So we're asking folks to sign up to endorse. I put the link in the chat. Many of you have not endorsed, although you have told us you support. We need that formal endorsement. And we're sending out an action alert in just a little bit today. We really encourage you all to reach out to your senators. The Senate in particular needs to hear from our community that this money is very important and that we have a huge opportunity to both preserve our existing housing stock and move our pipeline forward. So if you haven't done it, take a minute to do those two things.
And you have a question from our colleague Jonathan Cook at the Sacramento Housing Alliance about how we can all try to help move the bond forward in the Senate, Chioni.
The pro tem is obviously one of our targets. So please, if you have relationships, if you are doing development work or are operating buildings in the pro tem's district, he needs to hear from you how important this is. But really the work is to get all of our senators speaking out in support of this. We should not assume that the assembly is ours to be had either. At the end of the day, this is going to be a negotiation, what makes it over the finish line this year. So we need the assembly fully on board too. So if you have relationships in the assembly, tap on those people too and remind them that they voted for this and that we want to have them help us get it over the finish line.
Okay, we do have a question, but it's about housing credit affordability requirements. And I think I'm just going to answer that briefly by saying that California's minimum is almost always now 55 years. The federal minimum is 30 years, which we far exceed. And call out this is JT. The legislative idea would be to reconcile the inconsistencies in the affordability requirements between funding sources. And I'm not sure if there's a huge inconsistency at the moment, JT, because everything that uses state resources is typically at 55 years or longer right now. But if you want to elaborate on your question, please put another version of it in the Q&A. And let's see what we have here. Yeah, I'd say this is last call for questions for our policy panelists. All right, Shoni, for you, do you see the question in the Q&A there? Should I read it? Do any renters, I think Kevin's responding, but do any renters of subsidized housing get provided resources for possible mental health, financial literacy, help, or for long-term stability? From Maya Toriaga.
So we have, might actually invite some of our housing providers on this call who spoke earlier, whether it's Sociata or Sean or Kevin, to come on. But I would say our nonprofit affordable housing community is doing just a phenomenal job with very few resources, trying to pull in a broad range of supports for tenants, including the kinds of things you've mentioned and many others. But this is another area where we're vastly underfunding the need. So our developer community does their best trying to identify sources of funding, getting very creative with how they bring services into their buildings. And it's a place where California needs to be doing a lot more to invest more deliberately to provide those supports for families and individuals. I don't know, Sociata, Kevin, Sean, anyone who spoke, Heather, people who spoke on the earlier ones and who are actually providers, if you have anything you want to say about that.
Shioni, I think you summarized it really well. And in fact, because our operating budgets don't fully pay for resident services, we do a lot around philanthropy and recruiting grants to help subsidize those services at our properties. If the state was able to make more resources available, that would make a huge difference.
Yeah, I would echo that. I mean, we do the same. We certainly try to subsidize it with external fundraising and partnerships, and do a lot of that. It just came off of a very large campaign to try to raise sources, but it's always a challenge, as Kevin mentioned.
Well, I think that's a good spot to start wrapping up. And I just want to really thank starting with this panel, but Shoni and Abiel and Layla and your organizations. And of course, Andrew, thank you from us, and Sean and Kevin, Sociata, Heather, and our two researchers, Danielle and Matt N. We really appreciate the partnership with our external partners. This work takes a village. We can't do it all by ourselves. And I hope everyone who's out there can please, just doubling down on Chioni's request, if you want to make a difference, the biggest single thing all of us can do right now is to sign on in support of the housing bond and follow that bond website for updates on how you can help move the bond forward. So with that, I also want to acknowledge our technical team here at the partnership, CRBL Communications Manager, Hilda Morona, Senior Operations Associate, Anna Drobny, our Operations Associate. You've all been terrific. And thank you all for tuning in, and stay tuned for more coming from all of us soon on this topic.